Hello everyone, this is a short video. I'm trying to squeeze this one in before I return to working on something bigger. But yeah, I have to address something briefly. Post-war is a word that we usually use to refer to the time period after 1945, after the Second World War. And it may take some time getting used to that when the war in Ukraine ends, post-war will refer to the time period after that war. But think about it in this way. Before World War II, there was another post-war era, one after the First World War. Before that, we lived in the post-war era after the wars of German unification. And before that, we lived in the post-war after the Napoleonic Wars. And post-wars, well, I believe they matter. This video is sort of a defense of myself. I received criticism from a friend about making videos talking about the challenges we face after the war in Ukraine, and I have also seen this critique by people in the server and comments. Some of you even think it is ghoulish of me that I talk about what we have to do once the war is over, what challenges we face after the war, before the war is even over. And since a large slice of my videos on this topic talked about the post-war, I would like a moment to defend myself and take a moment to just explain myself and take a moment to explain to you why I focus so much about the coming post-war. The post-war agreements after the Napoleonic Wars were unable to contain the political forces unleashed by the French Revolution, leading to the German Wars and the Balkan Wars. The post-war after the German Wars of Unification was unable to contain an expansionist Germany, driving Europe into the First World War. The post-war period after the First World War was probably the single greatest catastrophe in terms of post-war agreements and pretty much paved the road into the next great European disaster. But the post-war after the Second World War created such a stable political order that it lasted until 2021. And when we create the post-war after the war in Ukraine, then it will be in our interest that this post-war creates a peace that lasts as long as possible. I don't think any of you can argue with that. So, the agreements we make to end wars are, in my opinion, just as important as the wars themselves. A bad post-war agreement can lead right into the next conflict. So I would argue that talking about what comes after the war, what challenges we face after the war, and what lessons we learn after the war is important. I want to paraphrase one of my favorite historians here, Stephen Kotkin. Some of you probably already noticed that I read his work from previous videos. Kotkin frequently emphasizes the importance of winning the peace. To illustrate what he means by this, he likes giving the example of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union won the Second World War. What Kotkin means with this is not that the Soviet Union defeated the Nazis alone, but that the Soviet Union gained the most out of the defeat of Nazism, because they occupied half of Europe and subjugated its peoples. That is an extraordinary geopolitical victory to achieve with blunt force. So, the Soviet Union won the war. But, as Kotkin says, the Soviet Union lost the peace. Communism turned out to be dysfunctional and kleptocratic. It turned out that conquered people did not like having communism forced on them. So, communism was unable to build a stable social order. But liberal democracy is capable of building stable and functioning societies. As such, the West won the peace and defeated communism without firing a single shot. I want Ukraine not just to win the war, I want us to win the peace. To win the peace, we need to talk about the agreements that we are going to make to have peace. We need to look at the substantial challenges this war brought to us and adapt to them. And we need to talk more openly about the challenges we will face after the war. I talked about Ukrainian agriculture in my last video because with Ukraine in the European Union, that will be one of the greatest challenges we are going to face. I talked about how we understand and think of European cooperation because without it, we will certainly lose the peace. I talked about neutrality in Europe because I believe that Ireland and Switzerland in particular will face big and important challenges in a post-war Europe. And I wanted to encourage my Irish and Swiss viewers, of which I have several thousand, to talk and think about these problems and issues and challenges that they are going to face. I want to be very clear about something else that many people unfortunately seem to ignore. Those who are pro-Russian, they also talk about the post-war. They are very clear about what type of world they envision for after the guns go silent. The Russian state and its propagandists want to move on to the next war. They openly talk about the fact that the Baltic states are next. They have publicly threatened the Poles, Czechs and Romanians. Russia is talking about the post-war, and it wants a post-war in which Russia is a European land empire, the first European land empire since the end of the Second World War, which will dominate over much of Europe and leave the rest to be dominated by the Americans. They want to return to the type of imperial realism that divided the world up into spheres of influence. Far-right, pro-Russian positions are even more scary. AfD leaders, for example, have published articles and policy papers in which they praise Russia for establishing a multipolar world order in which might makes right. Citing Carl Schmitt, they proceed to argue that Russia is creating the Eurasian space and that Germany must step up to the challenge by creating a Central European space in which it dominates over her neighbors. And when you call them out on it, they pretend like they're just humble peace activists. The communist pro-Russians, well, they don't really have a plan for peace. There are those among them who have this delusion that Putin will somehow revive the Soviet Union, and there are some of them who hate liberal democracy so much that they're willing to support a fascist Russia starting a war of imperial aggression against it. Those few communists who actually read communist literature and believe that stuff constantly talk about imperialist war being beneficial to the material conditions of the working class. This is from Lenin, who, remember, came to power because the Germans sent him as an agent to Russia during the First World War. And Lenin concluded from this experience that wars between non-communist entities are good because they create power vacuums that bring people like him to power. So basically, just opportunism. Lenin and other communists just like to sprinkle intellectual-sounding words over it to make it sound smart. Commies do that kind of stuff. So what all of this should show you is nobody who is pro-Russian actually has a good plan for peace, not even the Russians. A Russian victory in Ukraine is basically just a stepping stone leading to the next wars. And it also means something else for the rest of us. We have an advantage, because those of us who support Ukraine actually have the ability and vision to map out plans for peace that actually last and bring prosperity. And for that reason alone, I think we should talk more about winning the peace. I hope this defense of myself is sufficient for those of you who leveled the criticism that it is too early to talk about the post-war. In fact, I hope I may have even convinced some of you of the importance of talking about a post-war. The war is still raging. It may go on for some years, but I believe one of the worst outcomes, especially for us here in Europe, would be for Ukraine to win the war and nobody then has a plan for after the war. Winning the war is a challenge. It is, however, doable. The numbers are all in favor of Ukraine in terms of technology and industrial power. I just believe the political will is lacking because the vision for the post-war is lacking. Having a plan for a post-war also matters to give people something to fight for and look forward to for when all of this is over. The war has also thrust us into a new Cold War standoff that is now going to be a certainty of the post-war era. There will be a democratic and authoritarian bloc facing each other. And in this environment, winning the peace will be one of the most important challenges. When the war is over, we will have to build functioning, stable societies that can outlast those of authoritarian regimes. We don't just have to win the war, we also have to win the peace. I would like to recommend you a book at the end of this. You can see this as a book recommendation for 2024. It's Postwar by Tony Judd. Some of you probably already know that I read this book, especially if you watched this video of mine, because it is Tony Judd who first formulated the idea that European cooperation and the European Union is a framework for creating a post-imperial world. That nation-state cooperation can undo the concept of imperial spheres of influence. But even if you disagree with this vision for European cooperation, the book is also relevant in the sense of that it is an analysis of a post-war order, how it came to be and how it built functioning and stable societies. So, if you don't yet have any plans for reading any books in 2024, I hope you pick up Postwar by Tony Judd, and I'll soon see you again with another video.